Okay, so the last talk of the weekend. How can we let go of strong bonds and attachments and continue to develop the path to enlightenment? Letting go of this mother and father to child bond is what I am struggling with, as my attachment to them is very strong. Please explain. Thank you for the weekend retreat. So, with mum and dad and the development of the path, you really don't have to let go of mum and dad at all, because the thing is that just because even with the monks and nuns in the monastery, your parents are not going to be impressed with you if you abandon them, if you refuse to talk to them. Don't keep in touch and give them a little bit of support. I mean, I've got my mother in a nursing facility in Como, and she's fairly strong and independent. She's Alzheimer's spectrum, so she needs nursing support. But even before my father died, I mean, he made it very, very clear that I had to come home, and if he passed, I had to come home and look after my mother. But I was just lucky that I had my father's support. I was able to set her up in Como. But the thing is that you owe your parents a very, very big deal, because they give birth to you, they raise you, they support you materially, emotionally, almost on almost every level you can think of before you become maybe possibly financially or emotionally independent. So even when I was home, my mother was covering. She covered me for like 30 years, even to the day I moved to Perth and was living in the community here. And sometimes, children, the sons and daughters, can underestimate or don't necessarily appreciate what the parents have done for them in the long term. And many people, even with young people, they really don't understand exactly where their parents were at, or the mindset of where their parents was at, until they have children of their own. Because until you've got that child parent, what would you call it? That the kind of protective, supportive feeling developed fully when you have your own child, you have your own one's own babies, sons and daughters, where that protective maternal instinct kicks in on both sides. Naturally with the mothers it's very, very strong. The fathers, it'll be at a lower level, but biologically that it's quite necessary. Otherwise the child is absolutely not going to survive at all without the care and support of especially the mother and the father as the second support person. So so young people will never really understand where their parents are at until they have their own children. And can you imagine that as you raise one's children, and as you get older, eventually you retire, become a senior person, and you're getting your health is starting to run down, you're getting weaker. For children to basically turn their backs, to like almost turn their backs on mum and dad and not reciprocate and not be there for them when they need support is what would you call it? It's a very, very, really, really poor attitude. Even with that what I mentioned previously with that other monk, I would never agree to something like that. And even one of the, this is kind of strange kind of monk sense of humour. I had I had a senior monk laughing at me saying that I abandoned my mother and kicked her into a nursing facility. But I was just lucky I had options. I was able to support her. Otherwise I would have had to go home. I would have been on a shoestring. I would have been struggling. I would have had to go back to work. She's on like a security estate, so it's quite expensive to live there with the standard of living, ongoing fees and charges. So it would have been a very, very poor state of affairs. But so you owe you really owe your parents one's life, even if the parents weren't necessarily, like incredible or fantastic as your key support structure. The fact that they, that they didn't abandon you, put you in a, what do they call it? Like put you in a skip and walk away, put you up for adoption and this kind of thing. We had one of our monks whose mother, she accidentally she got involved with a sailor, fell pregnant. She had to give him up for adoption. He didn't find his biological mother it was well over 20 years later. But because his personal karma was fairly good, he was able to find his mother. After he made the decision to look for her, he found her quite quickly, and she came over to visit. And amazingly, she was a meditator. She was a professional person, was a meditator, and but it worked out quite well. She was very happy to see him, and he felt the same. And he had his stepbrothers and sisters and whatnot. So, but with one's parents, you owe them a considerable amount, and that when people talk about attachment, you shouldn't be attached. I had somebody mention that to me the other day about developing the Buddha's path. It's quite difficult because you have to give up attachments and let go of so many things. But you've got this connection with the parents. You're looking at multiple lifetimes. You virtually with the mother and father, brothers and sisters, and very close friends. There's just no way you're going to go even one life. Probably the parents, you'll probably meet them almost every time. You wouldn't go a second life. You'd have one life. You couldn't go more than one life without meeting the parents. Again, the whole process of karma is incredibly complicated. There's just there's thousands and thousands of forces of energies at work. You're meeting so many people. You get involved with so many people, but the connection with mum and dad will always be El Supremo. It will be the number one, and so so realistically. You've got a very, very, very long history, but it was quite not even funny, but a bit. I was a bit sort of disgusted in a way. But the line that particular individual came out with, and because I said something like, I said, well, aren't you, how come you don't contact your mother? Why don't you give her support? And he said, what mother? What mother? He said, I've had dozens and dozens of mothers. And it was like that particular person, but because the thing is, even if the physical form changes, the person's physical body changes, the spirit of the individual, the person who raised you, gave birth to you, she may have looked like a physically different person previously, or the life before that, or the life before that. Sometimes they can arise not just the human world, but also in the Deva Loka realms, and but usually with the rebirth in Deva Loka, the person supposedly you arise there as a young person, but that karmic potential will still be there when it comes to say like a parent-child connection. But his attitude was that he's had dozens and dozens of mothers, so why did this particular person? Why did she even count? And so I thought, what's wrong with you? I thought, you're a monk in the monastery. You've been practicing for quite some time. You're with a very high-ranking teacher, and how can you develop an attitude like that? And his brother was a regular guy, and he just got just really outraged, and he was drinking. He told him all the rest of it. So, but I think it's a very, very big mistake not to value and not to appreciate the role that the parents play, and even that principle of attachment. If you really even with our monks and nuns that you can go home and see your parents virtually at almost any time. You can stay home for a week or 2 weeks. Almost at any time, depending what's happening with the work schedule and responsibility in the monasteries, but that connection, even if you might think, some people might think it's a problem, but I really don't think it's a problem at all. Your parents, they maintained their commitment to you, and you should do that for them in turn. So, but if you're worried about being attached and being an obstruction on the path, you've got a million and one things that you're attached to, and I wouldn't even make a fuss about mum and dad, because you can leave the two most important people, say, in your life. I mean, people have partners. They may, they what would you call it? They have, what's the right word? They could have had a person who was the love of their life, but even then, they can still, when it comes to developing the path, they can still leave that person and leave the children, and they're not going to be impressed with something like that. But it's much more complicated than that. Emotionally, he just couldn't work it out. He couldn't work it out with the ex-partner, with the children. They wouldn't accept it. They couldn't understand. The partner's Christian and whatnot. So it's quite a difficult situation. So you can try to reconcile. You can try to get them to understand, but they're not. They may be not at your level of development. They may not be ready to commit and essentially let you go. But then you'll get other people. We've had a couple of ladies whose husbands were interested in ordaining, and they were quite okay in letting them go and ordain. And in Thailand, it happens on a regular basis. The middle-aged men, the young men, will go into the monastery for at least a week, or maybe even for 4 pansa for 3 months. And that's quite acceptable, especially if the parent dies or grandmother dies. They'll go in and they'll make merit, and they'll dedicate the good karma that they generate in the monastery in the name and for the dedication of the close family member. So within Thai culture, it's quite acceptable for males to go into the monastery for periods of time. And we had one gentleman. He was actually a surgeon, local hospital, and amazing. It was while we were there, because he had his medical kit, and one of the monks had trouble with a cancer on his back, and he actually, because he had everything. He had his analgesics. He had injections. Had everything. Scalpel, and he actually did the surgical procedure right in front of all the monks, and removed it and stitched it up. Took it for pathology, because he knows his profession very, very, very well. He knew it was within a safe parameter. But so you've got people from all walks of life, high class professionals, right down to local farmers. And within the Asian culture, it's much more acceptable to allow the male members of the family to go in. And the thing is, with mum and dad, the whole development of the path, that the Buddha stated very, very clearly in the sutras that you cannot repay the debt that you owe to one's mother and father, and the only real way you can repay that debt is to actually be there for them in their time of need. So, in Western culture, we can get a bit blasé, with the parents. We'd rather sort of tuck them in. Some people might want to tuck them in a nursing home and just forget about them, but the level of commitment, that principle of, you have a debt, from the day you're born, you really have a lifetime debt with the parents, and and if they're struggling, if they're in trouble, and they're starting to fail, you really should, even on a moral level, you should back them up and support them, even if it's not. Even if it's difficult, even if it's not convenient for them, because they've already given you at least 30 years, 40 years. I mean, I know one gentleman, I think he's been living with his mother for at least, say roughly about 25, 30 years, and she's taken most of the financial responsibility. She's in a nursing facility now, and I think he's starting to struggle financially. He's like a lifetime student. He just does course after course after course after course with TAFE and tech courses and whatnot. But yeah, some people they're intelligent enough, but they may not necessarily want to work with other people. It's a matter of being able to get along with other people. That's the sticking point. So. Yeah, that principle, actually being, to be there when the parents need you, and to, protect them, to protect their assets, protect them physically, because unless you've actually got them like in care with a say like a nursing grade facility, that they may not necessarily be safe. They could easily take a fall. They can break a hip. They can break a leg. And when you're elderly, that can be a really, really big deal, because your mobility, you're not going to be able to move. You're not necessarily physically that strong, and it can really compromise your overall physical health and actual recovery. Because even when very elderly people break their hips, within the even within the medical nursing fraternity, the prognosis is not. It's not very good at all. The potential to recover from a major fracture like that and restricted mobility, you're going to be flat in bed for a long time. I don't know how many months. Usually, like the big bones in the body, you're looking at minimum 6 weeks. On external parts of the body, and the hips going to be much more than that. So even when I see my mother at the nursing facility, they're really strict. They won't. Essentially, she won't let her walk anywhere by herself. She has to use a walker. She has to use a wheelchair, because the whole thing with the level of protection, if the resident gets basically harmed, or they take a fall and they really get hurt, then you're looking at legal, medical implications with the facility, because they have to protect them when they're in care. There's all sorts of medical, nursing, legal, what would you call it, protections, obligations in place. So, but we've had disciples who refuse to put, or may not be able to afford to put the parents into care. But also, many of you are already aware of this, that under government law, that if the parents, if their assets are below something like it's $46,500, that you can legally apply to the government for ongoing nursing support up to $65,000 a year. So that's actually stated in law. The last time I checked, so even people who think they can't afford it, have got an option. They've got a government support option, because even these very, very high class nursing facilities, they still, under government law, they have a number of government allocated beds where even poor people, working class people who do not have the financial assets, can get the legal support. You have to do all the documentation, which may be quite sort of, I wouldn't say tedious, but it's going to be very significant, multiple pages and whatnot for approval. But and then you can be a poor person, working class, and still get admission to the best nursing facilities in Perth with the ongoing support. So. But getting back to that original principle, that when it comes down to actually development of the path, and the personal qualities that you develop, we've had a couple of lay disciples who've supported their parents at home over a number of years, and they did find it quite, definitely not easy. It could be quite difficult. But I think when you look at the overall equation, what the parents have given to you and what you give back, the level of energy and care that you return to the parents is going to be much, much less than what they gave you initially. And the thing is as well that if if one neglects one's parents and you lose them in unfortunate circumstances, I think you may have trouble actually living, with that loss, because you'll feel that you just didn't, what's the right word? You didn't essentially stand up and make an effort to care for them, and so with the whole, when we look at the big picture, the whole principle with karma and rebirth, they are going to be the two key people in one's current life, and even in the whole process of with karma and rebirth, they will be the two most important people. You do have sons and daughters, but it's that reciprocal thing. It's still the parent child thing, from the other angle. So, and when you look at karma in its essence, if, say for example, if I didn't essentially step up and make an effort to support my mother, or even my father if he was in trouble, with any of us whatsoever in general society, you will be subjected to those same conditions. So if you neglect and abandon, or even cheat or mistreat one's parents, that will come full circle, and then you will find yourself in those circumstances and on that receiving end. So one has to be, really has to sort of think about the direction of one's life, because every single one of us, quality of life, regardless of how poor, how rich, how young, how elderly, quality of life is a major principle. And if you can actually give your parents that in the long term, it means that their quality of life, their meaning to life is at its maximum capacity before you lose them. So, but some of these nursing facilities that you see are very impressive. They're very, very professional. They have they have multiple groups, at least usually 2 groups a day, at least 1 to 2 groups, usually 2. They have exercise, tai chi, qi kung. They have craft work. They have embroidery. They have what's that game? You think have things like checkers and bingo and a number of them. So the senior people, they're stimulated, they're entertained, they're engaged, they're involved. And because the worst thing you can do is just let them essentially just vegetate in front of one's television, and just sort of waiting for them for the person within themselves to pass away. And that way, even when you lose them, that you will feel that you really made an effort. Because I do know people who've been affected by say guilt and remorse for a number of years, because they knew for a fact they had the potential to help and support, and they basically pulled back, or they just got on with their own lives. They may have sort of put mum downstairs, in a little granny fat, while like the son and his new wife and the children were upstairs in like the house complex that they were living in. But eventually, his mum went into the nursing facility, but he didn't show up very often, maybe about once a week, and he would turn up about maybe 10 minutes before lunchtime. He was a professional person. He was a lawyer, so he was quite busy, and he was quite sort of wrapped up in his new wife. And but his mother got very, very, what's the word to use? Very, sort of like resentful, indignant. She couldn't believe that. And the nursing facility that she was in was reasonable, but it wasn't. I don't think it was the best that was available. So, but even then, I think she laid it down in the end. That I think she got very, very annoyed with him, and I think in the end she told him she said, just don't bother to come see me anymore. And eventually she passed. And what was the situation? She passed, and she passed away. I mean, quite an unhappy person. An unhappy person because the only I don't think she didn't have a daughter. The only son just did not fulfil his obligations to her, and it was like he just didn't really care that much. He wasn't really interested in his old mum, which is quite sad because they even as elderly people, even when we're 70, 80 years of age, if people disrespect us or if they treat us like we are second class and we are not of value as human beings, they still get affected. It hurts them. They get offended, they get upset, annoyed. Because in many cultures, the elderly people, they are valued. Like in Asian culture, we value our senior, our elderly people much more than we do in Western culture in a general sense. It depends on the family concerned, the children concerned. But they rely on the elderly people for their in those specific cultures which value the senior person. They value them for their knowledge and their experience and what their history, what they've seen and heard, and the stories they have and the skills that they have, and even like raising and teaching grandchildren. Like in Indian culture, they're responsible to teach the handicrafts and weaving and all sorts of different things that you know of in traditional Indian culture. So that's just American Indian culture. So it's just one example where the elderly person has a role to play. They make a contribution to the family unit, and they have a position of importance and authority, and people listen to them. They listen to their advice. They listen to their personal experience as skills, because as we get older, we may feel that because we're running down physically, we're running down mentally. We may feel that we're starting to get a bit useless and we're a burden and this and that. But it's a matter of placing the elderly person in a position where they can actually make some contribution. They are a person of value. They're a person who's recognised within the family unit, because as many of you know, within many Asian cultures, you don't have Centrelink, you don't have social security. Some countries may have like an emergency kind of financial support, but it's not a given in a number of Asian cultures that they fall back on their immediate family to sustain them and support them till the day they leave this earth. So, are there any questions with you guys at all? Anything whatsoever? Don't worry, it can be anything challenging, interesting. Did your meditation go okay? Was anyone was anyone dissatisfied with their quality of meditation at all? No? Got reasonably peaceful. Okay. Well, maybe we'll call it an afternoon because we've got things we have to sort out. Okay, so I'll catch up with you guys later then.